Games offer the chance to experience a true power trip, as you become a superpowered being capable of anything and everything. There have been many games over the years that have focused on providing that kind of liberating experience, but there's only one game that allows you to disguise yourself as an old woman and sneak into a military base and roundhouse kick a soldier 50 feet across New York. I'm talking, of course, about Prototype. Prototype might not have been the lengthiest series in the world, but in its short time it managed to cultivate enough of a following to still be well remembered nearly a decade later, along with earning a HD remaster on PS4, Xbox One and PC. Today we're posing the question that probably has an obvious answer: will we ever see a new Prototype game? Before we dive in though, if you could please slap the old like button, hit the subscribe. That would mean we don't have to prototype up a farewell to YouTube because we're sad about not having 10,000 subscribers. Please, we're so close. So close! Let's start with the prototype of Prototype. Prototype was the work of Radical Entertainment, a now defunct Canadian development team that formed back in 1991. For the most part, Radical were the team to go to when it came to licensed releases. In their first active year, they managed to secure the license to develop a Terminator game for the Nintendo Entertainment System, which goes to show how dedicated they were to creating licensed games. If you're still unsure of who Radical Entertainment even were, you'll probably be aware of a small game called The Simpsons Hit and Run. Radical Entertainment were responsible for the development of that game and of its predecessor Road Rage, which is arguably where Radical left their biggest cultural impact. You might not know of Jackie Chan's Stunt Master on the PlayStation 1, but you will know of Hit and Run. After the runaway success of Hit and Run in 2003, Radical would ultimately be acquired by Vivendi Universal, where they'd work on a variety of games like Scarface, The World Is Yours, Crash Tag Team Racing and Crash of the Titans. They also worked on Hulk Ultimate Destruction, which is about as close as you can get in Radical's back catalogue to a prototype. Well, prototype. In 2008, Vivendi were absorbed into Activision to form Activision Blizzard, with Radical at the time working on 3 projects: Crash, Mind Over Mutant, and at the time unannounced game, and Prototype. That unannounced game was Scarface 2, as Vivendi president Phil O'Neill viewed the Scarface series as a key franchise for the company that could spawn a Scarface 2, a Scarface 3, a Scarface 4. That's a lot of little friends. Due to the corporate restructuring, Scarface 2 was cancelled while the development of Prototype and Crash remained unaffected. However, Activision gutting Radical arbitrarily would come back to haunt Radical later on, but we're getting ahead of ourselves here. After launching Mind Over Mutant in 2008, Radical sunk their resources into the release of Prototype in 2009. Playing as noted edgelord and general sourpuss Alex Mercer, he tried to stop an outbreak of something known as Blacklight, which mutates people into hideous monstrosities. It also happened to give you wicked awesome superpowers, as you can transform into whatever form is useful to you at that time. Need to disguise yourself as a soldier or civilian? Done. Want to turn your arm into a massive blade weapon that'd put most anime protagonists to shame? You can do that too. Prototype would prove to be a commercial success, selling over 2 million copies in over a year before being released digitally on the PS3 and Xbox 360. Critically, Prototype did okay, with reviews mostly being positive about the game's storyline and gameplay abilities. Prototype was a bit ropey though and drew criticism for its controls and also for the drab and dreary visuals. An interesting point of contention surrounded the game's launch date, as Prototype would launch on June 9, 2009 on PC, PS3 and Xbox 360, June 12th in Europe. This launch date was 2 weeks after the release of Sucker Punch's Infamous, another open world game where you play as a superpowered being, with Infamous differing from Prototype by focusing on electricity powers and a full morality system. One particular critic who noticed the similarities between the two games was noted internet firebrand Yahtzee, who compared the two games against each other in his Zero Punctuation series. Ultimately, there wasn't a solid winner, so he challenged both Radical and Sucker Punch to create a unique piece of art with their main character wearing women's underwear. That was certainly a thing that happened. After the cancellation of Scarface 2 and the release of Prototype, Radical would attempt to get multiple projects off the ground. Andrew Hume spoke to Ars Technica in 2011 to confirm that a Scarface sequel was cancelled by Activision and that he spent a year working on an unannounced game that would ultimately be cancelled too. These issues would lead to Hume leaving the company to form Min-Max Games. The prototype sequel was first revealed at the Spike VG8 in 2010, with Radical working on the game heavily up until its release in April of 2012. Prototype 2 follows new protagonist James Heller, who would be infected with the Blacklight virus by Alex Mercer and become another super-powered badass. The story would bring the two into conflict with each other, with the majority of the game's promotion focused on the fact you'll be fighting against the guy you once played as. Radical and Activision went heavy on the promotion for Prototype 2 before the game's launch, with a Facebook app called Blacknet designed to offer behind-the-scenes footage of the game's development. There was even an official iOS game called Proto Slice that was designed to promote the full game, but whether or not that led to Prototype 2 becoming a success or a failure is still undecided. Prototype 2 received similar critical reception to the original, along with the endorsement of community creator Dan Harmon, if that means anything, and commercially, Prototype 2 would go on to become the best-selling game in the month of April 2012 and would experience continued success the following month. Unfortunately, that wouldn't be enough. Despite being one of the more successful games of the entirety of 2012, Activision would deem Prototype 2 to be a failure. Yes, even though it was the most successful game in the month it launched, Activision stated the following in a press comment to IGN. Although we made a substantial investment in the Prototype IP, it did not find a broad commercial audience. That same statement came as Activision announced that they were shuttering Radical for good. This was nearly a decade ago, and yet Activision's strategies regarding their own studios seemingly hasn't changed. A few weeks ago at the time of recording, it was revealed that Toys for Bob, developers of Spyro Reignited and Crash 4, would become yet another Call of Duty support studio. In that same IGN article, the statement from Activision would go on to say, "Radical is a very talented team of developers, however, we have explored various options for the studio, including a potential sale of the business, and have made a difficult conclusion through the consultation process that the only remaining option is a significant reduction in staff. As such, some employees will remain working for Radical Entertainment supporting other existing Activision publishing projects, but the studio will cease development of its own games going forward." The reason why Prototype 2 failed in April 2012 is because pretty much all games failed at that time. NPD published statistics for game sales and industry finances in that month, finding game sales had fallen 42% year over year. Activision blaming the perceived lack of success for Prototype 2 and shutting down Radical as a result seems like a blindly made decision that doesn't take into account the context of when the game was launched. If Prototype 2 was the most successful game in a period where the entire industry underperformed, is it fair to blame Prototype 2? It just seems like Activision were looking for some kind of excuse to kill off Radical and to be done with it, a common theme for Activision's handling of their studios. So, new Prototype. We'd like to see one. Despite aging like milk that has been sat in your living room window for 6 years, the original Prototype has a soft spot in our hearts purely due to the level of chaos you can conjure. Assuming the identity of random civilians to smack the crap out of monsters, or using the patsy move to declare soldiers as monsters so that others turn on them, was always entertaining to teenagers across the land. As for whether or not we'll ever see a sequel, we wouldn't bet on it. We did see Prototype 1 and 2 remastered for the PS4 and Xbox One, but reception to that release was somewhat frosty, largely because they're warts and all ports of the original games with very little in the way of improvements. If you're expecting lovely new textures and massive frame rate improvements, you would be mistaken. Activision Blizzard have proved that they're willing to raid their back catalogues in search of the next big hits, with remasters and remakes for the likes of Crash, Spyro, Call of Duty and the upcoming Diablo 2, but the fact remains that Activision never really held much stock or faith in the Prototype brand. They killed it and its developers off once before in sacrifice to the Call of Duty gods, so they're not going to go back again. Not for Prototype. Then again, no one says that Activision have to be the ones to publish a new game. They currently own the rights to the IP now, but what's to stop some enterprising publishers from making Activision an offer for a new game? If anyone was to do it, it would probably be THQ Nordic, who have made a habit of hoovering up all the game franchises in the world and creating ports, remasters, and even full-blown remakes. They did it for Destroy All Humans, they're doing it for Time Splitters, they could theoretically do it for Prototype. Still, that's just some speculation on what could happen, and the only way it'd ever become a reality is if people ask for it. Personally, a third prototype leveraging the power of modern PCs, the PS5 and the Xbox Series XS would be a world beater, but the demand has to be there for it to happen. Just make sure to ask nicely, please. And there you have it, that is the past and future of Prototype. Did you enjoy the Prototype games when they came out? Sign off in the comments and let us know. If you liked the video today, please hit the like button, slap the subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any future content. Please check out all the social medias on screen now, the Twitter, the Facebook page and of course the website, vultures.com, and hopefully we'll see you in the next one. But until then, cuckoo.